Good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to you all. Thanks for being here today. Today is our second in a three-part series looking at volunteers, and today we will be looking at recruitment to your board of trustees. So my name is Aisling. I'm Community Development Officer, if anybody doesn't know me yet. I'll be hosting today's session, which means I'll be doing the housekeeping bits and pieces. So first of all, just to let everyone know, this session is recorded, but only myself and our speaker will appear on screen and be heard. The sessions will be uploaded into our members area as a learning resource. So please, if anyone from your organisation hasn't been able to come today, then they can view those at a later date in our members area, where we'll be putting all of this series and our previous series. So if you look to the bottom of the screen, there is a chat function and a Q&A box. So we would encourage participants to post questions and queries, any comments in those boxes throughout the session. I'll be monitoring those throughout. We will hold a space at intervals and at the end for Q&A. So please, as many questions as possible. So if anybody doesn't want to be emailed after this session about future sessions, if you just drop me a line in the chat box, then I'll make a note of that. I think that's everything for housekeeping. So I'm going to hand over to our speaker for today, Diane West. So I'll just bring you in there, Diane.
Hello, good morning. Hi, are you passing over now, Aisling? Yeah,
I'm passing over. Yeah.
Lovely, excellent. Good morning and welcome to this webinar, which is going to be on quite a lively topic, and is always one of those that many of the organisations that I've been working with have struggled with over the years. So warm welcome with that, and please do use this opportunity to ask all the questions that you've ever wanted to ask. So we try to make this a very comfortable and safe space. So a little bit about me. I've been an independent consultant and trainer for the last about 16 years, but basically working in the voluntary sector and community sector for about the last 32 years odd. And I've run organisations, and I've been on boards and been to the chair to the board of trustees. I've run organisations such as Women's Refuge and a youth counselling service and a community centre, like a local community association. And also I've run a CVS type organisation that offers services to other organisations and capacity building services and support services. So I have a very good general knowledge about a broad range of areas. And so these seminars are drawing on all that experience to bring that to you in a very kind of potted 1 hour slot. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is that we're going to have an opportunity to look at the building blocks that you need to have in place for volunteers generally. And I was talking to Aisling earlier about who was on the seminar last week, because I've left in some of those, and I was going to say to you, if you were here last week, then some of these are crossing over. So, but you're not, you're all new today. So I'm going to touch on these very briefly, the building blocks of having good support for volunteers generally, because your board, whether it's your committee or your board or your directors or your trustees or whatever term you use, it's slightly different, and I think you'll agree that it could be particularly challenging to recruit people to your board, and certainly what I'd consider to be the right people. And what I mean by that is the right people for your organisation at this time. Okay, so we're going to have some good ideas for you, and looking at some of the building blocks that need to be in place to help you to recruit very well. I noticed that there's been a flurry of activity already. So Aisling, is there anything that I need to be picking up with you immediately?
There's no questions just as yet. I just think there was just a small issue with the sound just at the start of the session, but okay. I think it's okay. There just might be a little bit of an echo, but listen, we have the technology. It's just whether it works for us or not. Sure.
Well, let's roll on.
That's all. Let's roll on. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Okay. So some of the things that we refer to as the building blocks to be in place for good support of volunteers are things like the commitment to supporting volunteers from the highest possible level. So this is going to be on the board itself, isn't it? And looking at the roles that they're going to perform in the organisation. So last week we were talking about the different roles that volunteers will perform in your organisation and whether they're equipped to perform in those roles. So often what we get are scenarios, and I'm going to allude to some of the problems, you know, in case you don't raise them as particular queries, but as we go along, I'll kind of give you suggestions of some of the issues that I've found along the way and how we've tackled some of those areas. Okay. Looking at what your current organisation needs at this time. So on your board, you're going to have particular things that you need from your volunteers who are serving on the board, and you might have gaps. Next week, we're going to focus quite a lot on the skills audit and how you diagnose what you need. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that particularly today, but we are going to be talking about how you might want to go about recruiting and emphasising that side of it today. We will be talking about how you support your trustees or your board members in the same way that you would support any volunteers that you have in your organisation. And often the key to the successful management of volunteers and helping us get the best from our volunteers is in the range of support that we have that's going to help them through the organisation. And this is also underpinned by the policies and procedures that you'll have in place. So I'm throwing a lot of things in there, so please do ask Aisling any questions and we'll pick them up as we go on. So for example, when we're looking at the policies and procedures, we're talking about maybe a volunteer involvement policy and also a way of supporting volunteers, whether it's through supervision or regular meetings where people come together and have discussions. The confidentiality policy, this is really, really key, where you're working in very small communities and your volunteers actually know lots of members of the community. You'd need to pay particular attention to having a policy that's going to be talking and helping volunteers when they come to you learn about confidentiality. I had an issue just before we came online this morning, funny enough, where I'm working with an organisation at the moment. I have a broad portfolio of different things that I have going on at any one time, and I do basically I do some of the bookkeeping for one of the projects that I'm working with, and they're a community centre and their board of trustees are very well-known people in the local community, and that presents its own problems because what we were talking about today is about who's paying for classes and whether people are paid up, and actually then sharing that information amongst the trustees is going to be more complicated when they actually know the people that are involved or they attend some of the classes themselves. That's a really good example of where confidentiality is quite a key component to your policies and procedures that you have in your organisation. The rest of the list there is in front of you: complaints, whistleblowing, code of conduct. Handbook I've got as a question mark, and the reason why I've got it as a question mark is because when we're very small organisations, you might feel that having a handbook for your volunteers or your trustees is going to be too unwieldy or too much of a commitment to be able to actually, you know, it feels like too much for you to have. But having a collection of policies and procedures in a little handbook or online is going to be, you know, suffice. As long as you're beginning to embark on this way of thinking that all your volunteers will need some kind of support and induction, and these are the kinds of things that they might need. So in addition to those general policies and procedures, you're going to have things like health and safety. You might have safeguarding, and we're going to touch a bit on that later as well. And these are all just areas that I want you to be thinking about when you're thinking of specific support to the different volunteers that you have. So the main area that we're going to be looking at today then is volunteers that serve on your board. So I've already touched on that term, and many of you might be a charity, so that's going to depend on what legal structure you are. So for example, if you're a charity, you would call your board of trustees. They also might be directors if your charity is also a company at the same time. You might be a charitable incorporated organisation or a CIO, or you might be a KIC that has a board of directors. But all these different terms are talking about the people who are responsible for steering the organisation in terms of the management and administration and taking responsibility. And it's because they have a much bigger responsibility than other volunteers that are in your organisation that we have to look at the recruitment of them quite differently. So any questions on that so far, Ashley?
Not just yet, Di, thank you.
Okay, lovely. So we commonly associate people called committee or trustees, and I'm going to from here call it committee because that's the most probably common that you're used to having. Okay. And so what are they responsible for? So when we're looking at our board or our committee members, they're going to be responsible for all of the activities and all of the service delivery and ensuring that your activities are safe for the people that you're serving, that all the measures are in place that offer a safe service, the buildings that you have, or if you're running a community centre, for example, that they're kept in safe and good condition, that the people, the staff, the volunteers and trainees, or if you're a volunteer-led organisation, that the volunteers are provided with the kind of support to mean that they have a meaningful and useful experience when they come to you. The financial viability of the organisation and remaining solvent, and that's one that's quite actually hard to tell sometimes because many voluntary organisations bump along and have cash flow problems, you know, and things, money comes and goes during the year, and you might get grants from different places, but sometimes it's quite hard for your trustees to know when you're not no longer financially viable. And this is quite a key area for your trustees to have some support and training in as well. Fundraising and funding, and for ensuring that the funding strategy or the plan of funding is going to be adequate for your organisation's needs. So these are all areas that are the responsibility of your committee. And so the people that you're recruiting to your committee have quite a weight of responsibility. The marketing and information management, we've seen a massive growth this past year or couple of years on GDPR and the information management, and the weight of that responsibility of managing information properly and appropriately within your organisation has been something that's been quite challenging for many small organisations. So actually ensuring that the information that we get from people and how it's shared has been quite a big learning curve for many people. I'm actually delving into a couple of these areas for you just to kind of bring to you some of the kind of key issues that many of the organisations I've been working with have been grappling with. So if you flag up as we go along that there are other areas that you're interested in, please do let us know. So the committee then are responsible for the governance and compliance. And what we mean by that is making sure that your organisation is run in a really robust and professional type of way, and that we adhere to all the laws that are appropriate. So that might be, for example, charity law. And that might mean that you're having to make sure that you do the returns to the Charity Commission on time, that you get your accounts produced on time, that you are, if you're a charity, that you're advertising your charity number and your registered address on the website and all your publicity materials. And these are the common areas where we often forget to that these things are a compliance issue. They are a legal compliance issue that you need to adhere to, and your trustees need to be generally aware of all these different areas. So when you're quite small and you're a new organisation, and there might be some of you out there that are a group of people and you're just setting out and you're a brand new organisation, many of you might be well established and you know what kind of organisation you are. But I've put that sentence at the bottom there saying that when you're quite new and you're a group of people, and say you have a constitution, you're known as what's called an unincorporated association or a group of people. And in that situation, all of the activities above, so whether it's the activities, the assets, the people, the finance, the funding, are all the responsibility of personally of those committee members, until such a time that you become something else, such as a company limited by guarantee or a KIC. all of the responsibility is on the heads of those individuals on the board as well. And this is all the kind of information that you're going to need to be talking to people about when they actually apply to you to be a volunteer on your committee. And that's what makes this area quite different. Unlike a volunteer that might come to you and say, right, I want to work a day a week, and I recently volunteered to be a volunteer in a charity shop, which is something I've always wanted to do. And I like just going in and just doing the stock or doing the till, and I don't have any kind of responsibility other than that. And that's quite refreshing. But unlike that, the trustees or the committee members are volunteers who have a significant amount of responsibility. And it's really key that we actually pass that information on. Okay, Aisling, I'm going to pause for a breath there to see if there's any more, any queries or questions about any of that so far, because I'm realising that we're galloping along here.
There isn't anything just yet, Di, but I'll be monitoring it all the while, so please do.
Yeah, lovely.
Oh, hold on a moment. Hold on a moment. Sorry about that. I've just have a question here that says, is it the same for elected members to a committee?
Okay, so there's different kinds of members to a committee, and what we're talking about here today are the committee members who are serving as the decision makers and are signed up, say, for example, with the Charity Commission. They're not necessarily elected representatives, so it depends what you, in your constitution, you'll have the definitions of what your different board members would be. And if you have a number, say for example you're in a community centre and you have a number of places that are held by the people that use the centre, once they sign up to be a trustee on the Charity Commission, their responsibility will be the same as any of the other trustees. And that's an interesting one, because particularly with charities, once you've signed up as a member, you're serving for that organisation. Even if you intended to come, for example, from the organisation down the road who's a good colleague or you work a lot together, once that person signed up as a charity trustee on the Commission's website, they have equal responsibility with everybody else. Okay, don't know if that's answered your question. You might need to look at your constitution for that. But there might be some organisations have different kinds of members. If your constitution says that your elected member doesn't have the same responsibilities, then that would mean it's slightly different. And so you might want to be separating those people out when you're making key decisions as well. So that's another whole area that we could get into. Aisling.
I think that's answered it, Di. Thank you.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you so much. All right.
Yeah, no problem. Any of those, bring them in. It's quite,
bring them all
challenge
in.
us. Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's exactly what we're here for. Okay, so next what we're going to talk about is your offer and what you're offering people. So often we are perhaps less good at promoting what we're offering people, and with volunteers, as with any volunteer that you're going to have coming through the door, it's a reciprocal thing. People are bringing their skills and experience and expertise, and what you're offering them is something in return. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what your offer is. So, on the board particularly, it's a learning and networking opportunity to meet other people who are going to be interested in the same things. I've put buddying system or peer support because if you were looking after volunteers that were not in a position of being on the board, you would have a line management system. So you would say you would have a named person that was going to look after that volunteer for the time that they're with you, and for the reasons that we talked about last week. So if you're, please do ask Aisling if you want the information from last week too. But with your committee, what I'd recommend is that you consider doing a buddy system or a peer support, so that when somebody's new, that they have somebody that they can talk to on a regular basis, that's going to help them understand some of the culture, some of the being new on the board, maybe they've never sat on the board before, and to help them understand and navigate those first few meetings so that they understand how that works and that they've got somebody they can talk to about all the things behind the scenes. You know, when people say this, what does that mean? How do we do the voting? What's quorum? What does that mean? All of those little things that new committee members who have not served before on a board might have queries and questions about. So a buddying system is well worth considering. And that could be for the first 3 months. You might say for the first 3 months, you're going to meet up with Janet and she's going to be your person to ask any queries or questions. It also is a good reason to do that because, as you know out there, because some of you, I'm sure you've experienced boards and maybe sitting on boards where some of your members might be sitting there going, I'm not sure why I'm here and whether I'm being used as fully as I thought I was going to be. And so doing a buddying system is also a way of helping to delegate different tasks in your committee so that everybody gets an opportunity to do something. Because sometimes it's not always clear when people, you know, often I hear that, and it's very easy to do, is to have 1 or 2 people on the board of maybe 7, 8, 9 people, and it's often 1, 2 or 3 people that are doing a lot of the work physically day to day. And so these are opportunities for you to actually start changing some of that and start sharing some of the tasks and responsibilities. Okay, references. This is what we mean by references about your offer. You're offering a reference to somebody else. So you could be saying, by being a board member with us or a committee member with us, we will offer you a reference at the end of your time with us. Out-of-pocket expenses, even if people don't claim them, and we hear this quite a lot, is when people don't actually claim their out-of-pocket expenses. I would always encourage people to claim their expenses because that gives you a more accurate reading of what it costs for you to run that organisation. And often when I've been the CEO or a manager in an organisation, it's a false economy for people to not claim those expenses. What I've often tended to do is encourage them to claim, and then they can donate it back to the organisation if they don't want the money. And I know that sounds like an admin thing of going round, but it gives you a much more accurate reading of what it costs you to run, and it means that it feeds into your funding applications of the future. Okay, the most valuable thing then that you're offering a volunteer who's going to be a committee member is experience of working on a strategic level. And again, this is quite an interesting concept, I want to talk here about some of the problems about that as well. So often when organisations start, they might get a group of people who set the organisation up. And when you're quite new and embryonic, often the committee members are the people doing all the delivery as well. And so it's all hands on deck. But what then happens is, as you grow and evolve, you become needing to have those people that are on the committee stay on the committee to maintain that strategic level and direction and helping to steer the organisation. And they need to become less hands-on, and this is often a key area of conflict. And they need to make a decision whether their best contribution is either on the ground delivering the service or actually on the committee. And that's often a very hard decision to make. But this is a very common one in the life cycle of organisations, is where you get committee members who have suddenly many hats. They're on the committee, but they're also on the ground, and that can lead to lots of complexity. I'm going to leave that with you and let you ask some questions about that if you want to talk more about that in a bit. Okay, so the legal considerations around the recruitment of new committee members. You might want to think about age group, because you would have duty of care if people are quite young. And I remember with my daughter, when she wanted to be a volunteer, she was only 14 at the time, and that was quite hard to find her replacement. We did find a replacement actually with Home Start, helping young parents and in a support group. But we had to look at their insurance to make sure that it covered the age group, because she would have been their duty of care, being under the age of 16 or 18, and if somebody's in care, it's under 25 potentially. So these are the kind of considerations you might want to think about. you might want to think about recruiting people. There's no longer the ability to say we want older people, or we want, we need to be a bit more careful on our terminology. We can't say things anymore like, we want a school leaver, because that's actually discriminating and saying it's more about younger people than older people. So we do need to be a little bit more careful about some of the terms we use, and whether we say, we want men or we want women. There are times when we can actually recruit, and there's an exception. So if you're working in a women's refuge, for example, and it's gender specific, then you have more capacity to be able to use certain exemptions in order to recruit women, for example, if it meant that your trustees are going to have to meet at the refuge and it's got to be an all-women environment. Ashley, welcome.
Hi, Di. Just thought I'd jump in there just while we were in the flow of that particular point.
Yeah.
Just a question here that says, do charity trustees need to be over 18?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I mean, it's interesting because it also depends on what your legal structure is. So, for example, if you're also a company, there are certain age groups that you have to be a company director, and your trustees are also your company directors. So this is an interesting area. So although you might say yes to one thing and no to another, because there is a bit of flexibility with some, you'd have to look at your own constitution, what your legal structure is, and look at the Charity Commission to make sure that they are eligible. But there are particular legal considerations. They have to be people that are usually over the age of 18. They are usually, they can't have any criminal records around fraud or money and things like that. You also want to think about whether somebody needs to get a DBS. And what we call is a DBS is a disclosure and barring service check. And you wouldn't automatically do that for all your trustees or committee members unless the activities that they're going to have would require them to do so. Now that's quite an interesting one, because, for example, you might be mistaken in thinking that all trustees would need to get a DBS, but that's not necessarily the case. It depends what kind of organisation, the range of your activities, and what they're being asked to do.
Perfect. Just quickly, Di, because I think you just touched on it there. Is there a criteria for automatic disqualification for becoming a trustee on a board? Is there...
If you are, again, this is about your legal structure, so I'm going to be a little bit careful with my language here. So say, for example, I'll give you an example because we've had this before. I've had a real life example and I'll bring those in as we go. We were running a community centre, and what we didn't do at that time was have a disclaimer. So, for example, when somebody signs up to be a trustee, you have to ask them to sign a disclaimer to say that they're eligible to be a trustee. Now, this is, something, again, we can go into a bit more detail with the Charity Commission. It's all there for you to go into in a lot more detail. We can send you some, basic information around that. But I would definitely encourage you to get people to sign a declaration saying they're eligible to be a trustee, because we had one trustee who was one of the founder members, and he'd been a trustee for quite a few years. And what he didn't tell us was that he was struck off as being a director with Companies House because he fell out with Companies House about another company, and he was on a list that said that he couldn't be a company director for a minimum of 4 years. Right. And he didn't tell us, but our accountant, who was an independent examiner, had checked that as an automatic thing and was able to tell us, which was quite a shock, that he was ineligible to be a director. And so we had to go back to him and say, excuse me, because we weren't getting this, declaration done each year. So what I definitely recommend is that you get people to do a declaration when they sign up to be a trustee or company director. If you're an unincorporated association, so you're a small organisation that isn't registered anywhere, these things do not apply in the same way, which is why I'm not going to go down into any particular detail with any of those, because it really does depend on what your own legal structure is. But please do ask us more of those kind of questions.
Okay, lovely. Thanks.
Okay, so these are the kind of things that you'd be working with. So you'll be looking with charity law, health and safety, and the Charity Commission, as we've said already, is a really useful place and has lots of publications. Okay, so deep breath now. We're looking at involving volunteers, although we've been going into it, and I hope this doesn't seem as if we're jumping around too far, but please do tell us. So when we're looking at recruiting committee members, we're looking at specific skills and that we want from them, really. And there are different places that we can help people to fit the mould that we're asking them to fit. So we're asking them to fit the mould of a committee member with our particular organisation. We might have certain things that we want from them. And when we're thinking about how we can help that person to fit into that role, we can design them a task or role design. We can actually do them a task description or say, this is exactly what we want you to do. We can influence it through our recruitment, and we can influence it through our induction and the way that we help people understand what kind of organisation we are, and through ongoing support, supervision, and reviewing their time with us. Now, last week we were saying about reviewing volunteers' time with us, placements, or whatever you want to call it, and the importance of keeping that dialogue with somebody, because it's when we just involve people as volunteers and we just leave them to their own devices that we find that when things go wrong, it's very, very difficult to get into those kind of conversations or to correct things that are going slightly pear-shaped at the time. So what I'm advising is that we have ongoing support, both for our committee members as well as other volunteers within the organisation. And that can be either through your buddy system, or it could be through a peer support network, or it could be that everybody in the organisation has a chance to talk to the chair every now and again about how it, you know, how it's working out for them. But definitely, if the more you're hands off with your volunteers and allowing them to just come through the organisation without any kind of ports of review or opportunities to talk about their time, you're missing opportunities to actually correct things when they're beginning to go slightly smoothly. Okay. So on the role and task design, as you know, with the board members or committee members, we've got, we do an analysis, which we're going to talk about next week in our skills audit, about how do we diagnose what we need. But if it's clear to you what you need, you're going to need specific skills, experience, knowledge, or attitudes and behaviours that you're going to want from that person. So you might have a gap on your board on HR, or you might have a gap on your board for funding and doing funding bids, or you might have a gap where IT and helping people navigate through GDPR and all of those big issues that we were referring to earlier. These, you would list these and you would target specifically when you're doing your recruitment, and you carry it all the way through. So for example, you would write a task description saying, okay, there are certain bits that are on any task description or role description for a committee member. We can send you out some of these. There's loads of them, you know, whether it's through NCVO or whether it's on the website of the members area, because you're all members, you'll have a members area of Irish in Britain, and I'm sure we must have some role descriptions on there. Aisling will beaver away and make sure that we do at the end of this conversation, if we don't already, and I haven't checked there recently. But basically what you'd have is a committee member's role, and then you would add on to it the different areas that they're going to have responsibility for. And I would definitely encourage you to be thinking about each of your committee members having responsibility for some area or another. It might be an area they're interested in. It might be that they don't know anything about that area at all, but you're going to ask them to learn about it. And that means, again, we're coming back to a picture where all of your committee are made up with people that are all actively involved in something or another. So they all come to the board meetings or committee meetings, but they all then take on extra responsibilities. Any questions or queries, Aisling? Or give me the thumbs up.
Hi. We have one here. The question says, what would make you as an organisation decide to recruit a committee member for something like GDPR or HR rather than just a competent volunteer? Is that?
I think if you've got people that are competent volunteers that are willing to learn, then that you can turn them into taking lead areas in these areas. I think what we're saying, what I'm advocating, well, what I'm suggesting is if you've got a board of committed committee members that are generally good, and the responsibility of all these new things that are being challenging, such as GDPR, can be managed within that board, then that's great. Often I find that those things fall between the stalls. If we've got no staff members, particularly if you're volunteer-led, it either falls on the heads of those people that are the active 3 people that are always doing everything. So a way of actually distributing the tasks a bit more evenly is to, by taking those challenges and asking one of your other members who's not actually got a key area of responsibility to maybe take on that, so that there's more even distribution of weight of the tasks within the. But if you've got competent people that are happy to get their head around all these areas, and you set up a task group, and we'll talk about that in a second instead, then that could suffice. And it really depends. You're the experts at your own organisation, and you know what's going to work best for you. And so these are just ideas of ways of you tackling these challenges that come from outside your organisation, in a sense.
Okay.
Does that, I don't know if that quite answers it. I mean, sometimes you do need specific expertise, and sometimes you can't buy in, and sometimes you might feel like you could benefit from a particular expert in. So, for example, if you're getting staff and you've never had staff before and it's new for you, you might feel that you want to recruit somebody on your board with HR experience, so that you don't fall into some of the pitfalls around management of staff that are going to lead you into a lot of trouble.
Just touching on that side, just a quick question that just says, will we be touching on succession issues in this session?
Oh, now that's very interesting. I would suggest that you please do, as we're talking here now, that you write a little bit more about that, so that we can tackle that as a question and answer at the back, because I want to tackle some of those kind of pithy issues that come up. Because those are the ones that are the most challenging, really, which is maybe where we've got committee members that have been there very long, year on year and year, and they're actually beginning to damage the organisation, and their presence is not helping. It's actually beginning to hinder. So we can talk about some of those. No problem at all. I shall whisk through this, and we will get to the beef. Okay, thank you. So then the team, we're talking about what kinds of people are you recruiting for, and we're talking about chair, we're talking maybe about vice chair sometimes, we talk about treasurer. Some of these need particular effort to recruit too. So if you don't have any problem at all recruiting people to your board or committee, then great, that's lovely. But some of you that have come today might be thinking that you have had a struggle, and so therefore I want to make sure that you get what you need. And I find that when, by earmarking particular areas and giving extra effort, then you'll be much more successful in recruiting what you want. And I'm also going to be talking about equality and diversity, and about how that can come in as well. Because sometimes we find ourselves with a board of people that might be, perhaps less diverse than we want it to be, and it doesn't mirror our community in which we serve. So, I was working with a board recently that were mainly made up of people that were over 60, but they were doing a lot of young people activities. And so it was felt important that we try to recruit some younger people that might be able to influence some of those services. And so how we can manage to do that in our recruitment, we can talk about as well. But the way that I would definitely say to go is to look at the different skills that make up these different roles. So, for example, with the treasurer, you're going to need somebody who is happy to work with figures. Doesn't necessarily have to be an accountant, but somebody who's keen to work with figures, keen to kind of grapple with Excel maybe, or if you've got a computerized system with QuickBooks and that understands some of those areas. So I'm saying that in our recruitment, that we translate that into really specific recruitment. the mistake we sometimes make is by actually saying we welcome everybody, and by that we then miss everybody because we're not appealing to specific interests or people with particular skills. Okay, so I've put on there about the secretary role, and I've said that's optional since 2010. So if you're a charity out there and you are you have got a secretary role and you find it helpful, then that's great. In 2010, charity law said that we didn't have to necessarily have secretary on our board, but it means that you'd have to actually change your constitution if it's already in there, because you also need to follow your constitution. And that's the same with AGM. So we no longer need to run AGMs as charities according to charity law, but it might be within our constitution that we need to do that. Okay, so areas to consider then that we might want to have looked after. Again, you might be saying, okay, we handle these as a whole committee, but you might find that by carving it up, it might be a good way to have somebody leading on that area to make sure things get looked after. Health and safety is an area. Safeguarding, whether that's with vulnerable adults, if you're working in that field, or with children. Equalities and diversity. Human resources is quite a big area generally because it looks after the volunteers as well as staffing. Buildings management is another area that we've found in the past. If you're quite a small committee and you don't feel that this way of giving everyone a lead is the way to go, you might want to use subgroups or task groups. So for example, if you've got you might want to meet every quarter to talk about building and keeping a schedule of works to maintain your building, to make sure that it's fit for purpose and the health and safety gets taken within that. So you might want to do task groups to say you want to get all your policies and procedures up to date, and you want one of your people to, one of your committee members to have a little subgroup of 2 or 3 of you to work on policies and procedures, and then bring them all to the board, and then you sign them off one at a time over the next 6 months. So that might be a task group to get all your policies and procedures up to date if you haven't looked at them for the last 2 years. Definitely recommend doing all your policies and procedures and keeping them up to date every couple of years as a minimum. Funding is another area that you might want to have as a task group, that you look at funding and finance together. Or if you're creating a website, these are all different ways of working together. But the key bit there around subgroups is having a terms of reference, just having a sheet of A4 saying what that group does and doesn't do. The intention of subgroups, when they're task orientated in that way, are to actually come up with ideas, suggestions, ways forward. It's not to actually make the decision. It's not about taking and delegating responsibility about decision making from the board. It's about saying we need some extra effort put in this particular area at the moment, and then come back to the board so that we can make our decisions. Okay, so we're looking at a task description or an information pack, and we're putting that together as part of our recruitment. And this is a little checklist for you. We want a little bit about the history of the organisation. This organisation has been going since 2010. These are the services that we offer. We are, well known in the area of Lambeth or wherever. And where things are at now. So now we have, 15 volunteers, a board of 6 trustees, and we serve 600 people per year in the areas of the service provision or whatever it is that you're doing there. And our priorities, for a moment, we have a gap on our board for information or finance and funding, somebody who's going to take a lead or know a bit more about making funding applications to trusts and foundations. And so you're being really specific there about the skills that you want somebody to have. You would say, in the pack of information, the role of this volunteer is to work as part of the committee, and the whole committee is responsible. So you'd be talking about the boundaries of their role. This person is going to, take a lead on finding out more information about the kinds of trusts that we're going to apply to, and looking for and get some training in that area. And this is another key thing to remember, is about training your trustees or committee members in the area that they're leading on. So again, they're sharing the learning between them, but they're also becoming quite knowledgeable in those areas themselves. what are the skills, experience and knowledge needed? Okay, so I know that some of you might be coming from a place, and I'm going to be really open and honest with you here, that you might have an AGM and you might say, who wants to be a trustee? And somebody puts their hand up. I mean, I've seen that happen, and it still happens. And then we'll say, right, we're taking on name and at the end and your contact details, and then we're finding out in hindsight what that person can offer. And what we're saying here is, consider being much more proactive before your AGM, making sure that you're trying to find the volunteers with the right skills, experience and knowledge before the AGM, so that by the time the AGM comes up, you have people sitting in the room that you want to be, including on your board of trustees or committee. You might want to also include the key tasks for the next year. And this is again about introducing the concept and the idea that you've got particular things that you want to achieve. So you might say, at the moment we only have one funder that funds us, and by the end of the year we want to have at least 3 or 4 different funders or experience of different funding regimes, and we want this volunteer to be our trustee or committee member who's going to lead that initiative or that plan to help us progress on those particular areas. Okay, so where do you advertise? Who are you looking for? Again, depends on how much you want to be open and transparent about your processes. You could put your adverts out in, whether it's Charity Jobs, The Guardian, depends on what money you have. You could advertise it in the local CVS or Council for Voluntary Service. If, you could put it in your local newspaper. You could, depending on what you're looking for. So, for example, if you're looking for somebody in finance, you might want to consider going to a college where people are studying their accountancy exams, so that you get somebody who's finishing that particular course. You might want to be, I know of a committee, for example, that has prioritises local people. They only want to recruit from their local area in which they serve, and so they want to be very specific about local advertising. And that includes, when we say word of mouth, I mean, some people sometimes feel that that's not a good idea. I promote it. I think it's a great idea. The more people that apply and the more people that you target, the better. The other thing about word of mouth is that you can identify people and be more persuasive when you ask somebody directly. So, for example, if you know of somebody who is a community accountancy person, for example, and you're looking for somebody in finance, and you say, Kathy, you came to mind, and we know you're interested in young people. We've got a young people's project, and your finance skills are what we need at the moment. Would you be able to serve with us for a year? And notice that I'm saying that people, to join us for a year. So you're asking for somebody to join up as a trustee or committee member for 1 year only. And you're saying that's going to be 6 meetings or 10 meetings, and you're actually making it a very tangible offer. You're chunking it up into bite-sized pieces so that people can make a decision about whether they, if you said, okay, this equates to 5 hours a month. And then you'll find that Kathy will turn around and say, I think I could manage 5 hours a month at her cost. But she will be, finding it easier and more tangible to when you present it in such a way that's very, very specific. Okay. Any questions, Aisling?
Yeah, Di, you just said then about sort of discussing, committing for a year. Is that advisable to do that generally, to stop maybe kind of overlapping years, like I think what we talked about with succession? Is that to be explicit at the start?
Yeah, I would say explicit from the start. So you're saying, okay, so with a committee member, and we're going to talk about induction in a sec, but definitely say join us for a year, and because it makes it much more finite. And actually what you'll find between you, me and the gatepost is that some people will stay longer, and they'll say, yeah, go on then, I'm going to stay on for another year. But and that's a great thing. In some cases, it won't be a great thing. So, yeah.
Perfect. Lovely.
I've noticed the time, so I'm going to speed up now so that we can get to the questions and those meaty bits. So the advertising, what we're looking for, who does the organisation need? We talked about that already. Are we going to attract new people? The advert, what that looks like. I've actually got an advert, so if we have an awkward silence at the end and you've got no questions you want to ask, then we can look at an advert, or we can send it out to you afterwards. And I've prepared it so that you can put your bits in it, but it gives you an example of an ad. So even if we don't get to it, that's fine. We can send it out to you. Okay, we've just touched on this about charity jobs, Guardian, you know, you could do it very openly. There's also an organisation which I've listed there for you, Trustees Unlimited, which you could join if you're on less than, your turnover is less than 100,000, and they could do that free for you. They help you to find volunteer trustees. Okay, so we're going to talk about selection process here, and normally you would, with your trustees, you do have to be more careful about seeing if they actually are eligible to be a trustee. You should, and I would, yeah, you use the word should, use a very basic application form if that's going to be of use to you, and I would offer interviews so that there's a bit more of a formal process. If you know the person, then that's easier because you can vouch for them yourself, so you can cut down the reference side of things because you can have verbal references or written references. But with trustees, it is a little bit more formalised. So if you've got volunteers that you involve in a much looser way, generally, I would encourage you to be a bit more systematic with your trustees. And what I would also do is on the bottom there, I've got selection versus non-rejection. And definitely with my trustees, I would be selecting trustees. So we're saying we're advertising for a trustee, and we'll let you know whether or not you've been successful. So it is a bit like recruitment, which is more familiar if you're recruiting for a specific job in that sense, although it's not, it's a trustee and it's a volunteer. Okay. Definitely not non-rejection. So we're not, very rarely are we able to have a big enough organisation to be able to offer non-rejection. So non-rejection, what I mean by that is where you just say, we welcome everybody and we'll give everybody a place to be within our organisation as a volunteer. And that's definitely not something we can do if our boards are only 8 to 10 people. You're going to need specific skills with, even if it's knowledge of being a local person, that is a skill and an experience in itself. So it's about you analysing what you've got and what you need. A less formal process is that you could have role descriptions, which we, again, we've said that we can get you examples of, and I'm sure you can find them anyway. Circulate an advert amongst your networks of colleagues, access to another board member for questions, so they can ring in and ask somebody if they've got any queries or questions. Definitely do the interviewing with 2 board members and have set questions for all new members or during your interview process. The induction there and benefits of induction, I just want to flag up there the benefits of induction, which is that you're helping somebody assimilate to what you're like in your organisation. So you're saying, this is our history, this is how our structure is, this is your boundary of your role. We often get into pickles where trustees sometimes get involved in different areas where you wish they wouldn't. And that's often they're overstepping their boundary of their role, and that's often because we haven't told them in the first place what their boundary of their role is, and we haven't reminded them when they've gone past it. The problem is we've already allowed the horse to bolt down the field before we're then trying to encourage and coax it back into its boundary of role. So we can talk a bit more about that. And we've talked about ongoing support, but I'm happy to expand on that. And supervision we've left in there from last week, so that it's for those of you that weren't here last week. So we'd encourage people to have a taster and come to a committee meeting to see if they like the board, they meet the board, they're going to fit in, So it is about a process of saying, is this going to be suitable? Often what we try and do is encourage volunteers, put their hand up at the AGM, right, they're in, and we batten down the hatches. They can't get away until 2 years later. But I'm kind of saying, I think we need to kind of be much more specific. We need to be much more structured in some ways, even if we're quite small organisations, and we need to have it as a much more two-way process. Leaving the organisation, I'm going to leave that up there, I think, for a minute. We've got other useful resources, so that's fine. Oh, I've left that up there and I've done away with it altogether. So let me see if you've got any questions, Aisling.
Sorry, slight delay there with my video. We do actually, I mean, less of a question and more, I think, just something you touched upon, which is kind of balancing the role of the trustee in terms of, obviously, the organisation needs a level of scrutiny, but it's kind of finding that balance where they might be kind of maybe overstepping that, and it might be, you know, too much. Does that make sense?
Say that again for me. Do it again.
So I think you touched on it a little bit before about the expectations and where the role begins and ends.
Yes.
And I think some organisations have found some issues with maybe perhaps over scrutiny from trustees, and it's how to manage that kind of balance.
Right. So, and that's sometimes seen. So what was initially when they're first involved, so, you know, often that happens when organisations have been very young or people have been on board for a long time, you know, and they've been very hands-on, and they forget to be so hands-on, and it then becomes interference.
Right.
And it's unhelpful interference of board members in day-to-day running of organisations. I think number one is we must be better at actually talking about these things. So we have to call it what it is, you know, and it is, you know, going over their boundary of role, and it is interference where it's not needed. It's certainly if you're paying staff, and if you can afford staff, you need to then delegate responsibility of day-to-day running down to your staff members. And so it would be the chair's role to actually help some of the committee understand that that's a change. So when people move from that whole position of having volunteers into having staff members, there's a whole demarcation that says, okay, we need to be more hands-off now, and we need to delegate more day-to-day to our staff members, and we need to then ask them to account. And so your role of chair becomes more important, because your chair needs to help assert and ask everybody to rein back in a very conscious way and say, right, okay, we now have staff members that are going to do this. We need to actually allow them to do their jobs. Okay. So it's about revisiting that. So what you could do as a way of getting into that is say, you know, I've been on this training recently. So say if that's happening on your board, these are some of the interesting things that came up about that. What is our board's role at this time? Right. You know, it's asked the question about, you know, do we need to be so hands-on, for example? Do we need more people that are going to be strategic, and do we need on our board people that are very strategic? However, if you're brand new and you need people to roll their sleeves up and get stuck in, then you're going to be doing the opposite. So you're going to be saying, okay, we need more trustees that are not going to sit there strategically in a room going, well, let's all delegate it to everyone else. We need people that are going to be actually prepared to roll their sleeves up and do stuff. Hands-on, yeah. So each of you are going to be in a completely different place. Every single organisation is going to be unique and have their unique foibles and have their particular areas. More questions? Let's get some more. Yes, so just a question about trustees. Is there a body or a group that supports trustees? Because we know that trustees seek advice from, say, accountants or law firms, but is there anything specific, you know, any bodies that support trustees? Because it kind of ends at that level. There was a trustees network, yeah. Right. And what I've done in that printout in our PowerPoint is given you some links to some of the organisations that will offer some help. There used to be a trustees network, but I couldn't find it when I was coming to do this morning. It wasn't there. So, you know, we'll put it on that list, and we'll send this out to you afterwards. There's loads of stuff out there for trustees to help support them, but not so much necessarily. There was a trustees network, which I can't guarantee is there now because I couldn't find it, as I say earlier. But what I would encourage you to do is to team up with other chairs locally. So, or use your CVS or Council for Voluntary Service, and that's, you know, their job is to actually help support some of you locally. So depending on where you are in the country and what resources you have, sometimes you have good CVSs, sometimes you don't have very good CVSs. So it depends on the skill of the organisation, obviously. But again, that's another place to look. Whether it's that you set up your own network or whether you actually do your own peer support is another area. Yeah. So you might say, you know, well, chairs might meet together, you know, to have every now and again, every say quarter. Any more questions? Because I don't
There
wanna...
aren't, Di. There aren't any more. No.
All right. So what I've got up in front of you, I don't know if you can see. Can you confirm that you can see that, Ashley?
I can see that fine. Yeah. Okay. From my end, so, anyway.
Yeah, we'll just include this as part of the pack because I realise that we're going to be going out of time, and we're out of time now. But and we'll send you this, and it asks you some of the questions to walk you through doing a particular advert. Okay. Hope you've enjoyed today. I'm always out of time because there's so much more I can chat about than we have time to do. But we want it to be an hour because we want it to be a short, sharp injection of energy and give you ideas for supporting the recruitment to your committee. So lovely to see you all today. We'll not see you physically, but thank you for joining. Back to you, Ashley.
Oh, thank you, Diane. Thank you. That was an excellent session, very meaty, and hence why I think we got away with the time there. We've just had a comment through, just said it's given a lot of thoughts for consideration, so thank you very much. Okay, so just being mindful of the time, I'll wrap up now, but we hope that you join us next week, where I believe we'll be discussing skills audits. Isn't that right, Diane? That will be our next session.
We're going to be delving into that a bit more detail and saying, how do we do that? What does it involve? What kinds of skills? What do we mean?
Perfect, and I'll send those invitations around this week. All right, so thanks everybody for coming, and this will be up in our members area, as I've said before. All right.
Lovely.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye bye.